Hello, BookTube. I've got a bit of a different kind of video for you today, a book preview, as it were, of 7 books from 2020. I am not reading books in 2020 while I'm still in 2019, and I don't know if I will read any of these books when 2020 comes along, but I have them, and I'm not sure that we've seen a lot of them. I thought I'd show them to you and get you ready. and in addition to being 7 books, they have another connection with 7, which is that they all come out on January 7th. That's the release date for all of them. I don't know how hard and fast that is. Publishers sometimes do that for just to demarcate the Tuesday in question, but they don't always hold hard and fast to that. So some of these things might be out, as soon as your bookstore reopens for the new year. But I wanted to show them to you. They vary quite a bit. So let's look at the first one. The first one is biography, my own favorite genre. We might have seen this on this channel before. This is Laura Thompson, and this is A Life in a Cold Climate. This is her biography of Nancy Mitford, who wrote Love in a Cold Climate and a bunch of other stuff, and was one of the Mitford girls, and probably the best subject for biography of all the Mitford girls. And this comes out on the 7th, and seems enticingly good to me. Laura Thompson, her name might be familiar to you. She wrote a biography of Agatha Christie just recently that was really good. I wonder if they give us a description of biography of her so we can know a little more. She won the Somerset Maugham Award for her first book, The Dogs, and is also the author of the critically acclaimed biography Agatha Christie: A Mystery Life, as well as The Six, which was a book about the Mitford sisters. And this is all about Nancy, who, in the words of her sister Lady Diana Mosley, was very complex. I'm sure that Diana Mosley wrote V. complex. These were all Bertie Wooster. Every one of them was. Her highly autobiographical early work, the biographies and novels of her more mature French period, her journalism, and the vast body of letters to her family, all tell an intriguing story, and this book draws on all of those things. So you're going to have one of the year's very first big fat biographies. We'll see what kind of a year 2020 is for biographies, but this will be one of the first ones that gets reviewed everywhere. Then we move from that to online life. This also could get reviewed everywhere because everybody's online. Not everybody knows who the Mitford sisters are or gives a rip, but everybody's online. Everybody uses computers. Everybody uses email, and that's what this thing is about. I don't know if we've seen this or not, but this comes out on the 7th, and this is Victoria Turk's book, Kill, Reply, All: A Modern Guide to Online Etiquette, from Social Media to Work to Love. Kill, Reply, All, which is not. It isn't 3 separate things. It's saying no one should ever use reply all. Want to Marie Kondo your digital life and develop a more mindful, meaningful relationship with technology? I wonder what Marie Kondo thinks about her name being a verb. How do you reply to your colleague's weird email? What would Emily Post say about your Tinder profile? And just how do you know if you're mansplaining? In this irreverent journey through the murky world of digital etiquette, Wired's Victoria Turk provides the tools you need for minding your manners in a brave new online world and making peace with the platforms, apps, and devices we all love to hate. I can answer those setup questions. How do you reply to your colleague's weird email? You don't. And not just a colleague, but friends, relatives. If you get an email that's unseemly or weird, ignore it. And either the person who sent it will realize that it was weird and why, and send you something more tempered and maybe even an explanation or an apology, or they will ask you, why haven't you responded? And then they have asked you, and you can, in all good etiquette, tell them, your email overstepped the bounds in this, and this way, and that's why I ignored it. If you don't want me to ignore future emails, don't do that. Again, so that's the answer to number 1. What would Emily Post say about your Tinder profile? You shouldn't have a Tinder profile. That's what she would say about them, and she'd be absolutely right. Who are the people that you're going to meet through that profile? Why don't you go out and meet a real flesh and blood person? Why don't you try that? Join a reading club at your library. And just how do you know if you're mansplaining? That is very simple. That has always been very simple. you periodically stop to listen to the person you're talking to. If they want you to continue explaining something, they will make it clear. If they don't, they will make that clear as well. The key to knowing whether or not you're mansplaining is to check to see whether or not your explanation for anything is actually wanted by its recipient. That's all. It's as simple as that. But anyway, I love these kinds of books. There are manifestos like this every year and every season. People trying to. In 2019, I read Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport, which definitely tries to Marie Kondo your electronic life by getting rid of it all. So, always fascinating. This next one, we move to fiction. And this is not just fiction, but it seems to be positioning itself in a fairly rare subcategory of fiction, which is the intelligent thriller. And don't get me wrong, I love thrillers. Absolutely love them. I read a ton of them. Just did my year's best list of the best thrillers of 2019. I think they're great. But they are unrelievedly, almost carnival level dumb. Most of them, 99% of them, are almost carnival level dumb. The villains couldn't order a coffee at a Dunkin' Donuts. They're villains all the time. They're totally unbelievable. The heroes are flameproof, bulletproof, age-proof. The women age and have seams and laugh lines and tummy tucks and big tushes and whatnot. The men are always steel-hard greyhounds, even in their 80s. And cannot be hurt in any serious way. They get shot in the chest and tough it out so that they can beat the villains at the top of the Adirondacks or whatever. They're absolutely ridiculous. It's only a very small handful of thrillers that are actually intelligent literature, that actually engage your brain as well as your heart rate. The name for me that comes immediately to mind is Robert Harris. But it looks like this author is being poised by her publisher and by a lot of people who are blurbing her to be one of those. This is Liz Moore, and her new book coming out on the 7th is The Long Bright River. Kind of minimalist but very attractive cover design. I like it. And this is it's set against the vivid neighborhood in Philadelphia rocked by the opioid crisis. In this book, Liz Moore does for Philly in the Long Bright River what Dennis Lehane does for Boston or Richard Price does for the Lower East Side. She gives readers a gritty, cinematic, street-level crime story so integrated into its setting. The place is almost a character itself. At the heart of the novel are two sisters who occupy the exact same neighborhood but lead drastically different lives. One is a police officer, while the other suffers from heroin addiction and lives on the streets. Once inseparable, they haven't spoken in years, but when women start being murdered in the area and one sister goes missing, the other must risk everything to figure out what happened and save her. So, I wouldn't need, even if this were, the typical half-woman profile in the dark with street lamps in the background called, Say Her Name or Tell Me a Lie or something silly like that. Even if this were that, I still read. I read a bucket load of thrillers every year. I would still read this, but it comes with a packaging that raises my expectations just a bit. That might not be fair to the book, but the packaging and the advanced buzz leads me to think that it might be a thriller that will stick with me, a thriller that I will remember a bit, which would be really nice. That'd be really nice. The next one, keep in mind, January 7th, these 7 books, it's 7 for the 7th. And this is by Peggy Orenstein, and it's called Boys and Sex. And suddenly, Sean the Book Maniac has put down his meal. What was that? This author did Girls and Sex. Now she does Boys and Sex. A book in which she interviews tons of people, interviews tons of experts in an attempt to just blow away the fog of folklore and mystification on the subject and tell what is actually the case in 2020. Let me see if I have something I can tell you about it. Yeah, I can. Let's see here. In her taboo-shattering New York Times bestseller, Girls and Sex, this author traversed the complicated new landscape of sex and sexuality that today's young women must negotiate. And in this book, let's see here. In this book, she talks about the other side of the conversation. In a world where the sheer magnitude of sexual misconduct by men, young and old, has become glaringly and disturbingly obvious, Ornstein knew it was time that she look at the sexual attitudes, activities, and insecurities of a new generation of men with the same depth and candor. This book draws on Peggy Ornstein's trademark mix of richly reported anecdote and research to reveal how young men understand and negotiate the new rules of physical and emotional intimacy, and to map out a much-needed vision of how today's boys can move forward as better men. It's all about the concepts like toxic masculinity or hookup culture or the cesspit that is online. And I read Girls and Sex and thought that it was really good, really intelligently done, very little in the way of pandering. You get 1 million books like this a year, and they're all pandering, most of them. But I didn't get much of that with Girls and Sex. And Boys and Sex is a subject I know much better myself, just firsthand. I've spent a lot of time in the 21st century with young men, with teenagers and men in their early 20s, and been there in the room asking Peggy Ornstein type questions about, what do you think about this, this, and this? What do you feel society expects of you? What do your families expect of you? When you go to a frat party, one of those ones with the plastic red cups everywhere and no police intervention, what sorts of rules are you thinking about when you go there? What are your expectations? What won't you do, and what won't you allow someone else to do? The reason why I am more optimistic about young men than most older people in American society, and certainly more than anyone my own age, oh my God, the reason I'm more optimistic about them is because I have talked to them, and in a position and in a circumstance where I know they're not lying to me. And I have heard many encouraging things. I know that Pub Sheet was entirely right. The bad stuff is all over the news. But I've heard many encouraging things. The only horrible thing underlying all of this, and I imagine I'd hear the same thing if I were in a position to talk to young women in the same way, the only horrible, what I consider to be truly horrifying thing that underlies this whole thing is that these people are figuring it out for themselves. They have to. No one is talking to them about any kind of stuff like this, which is why so many young men are aimless and sometimes become dangerously so, because no one is talking to them. No one is metaphorically taking them by the hand and telling them, okay, that's really interesting, but this other thing you just said or did is really dumb, and I'm going to spend 5 minutes mocking you for it, and then I'm going to explain why it's dumb in a way that you will understand. And if your friends want to listen, that's fine, because so that they don't make the same dumb thing or do the same dumb thing. Young men used to have people like that in their lives, whether they wanted them or not. They had parents, they had fathers, they had older brothers. A lot of them had the military. And the boys that I've talked with in the last 20 years do not have anything like that. They're figuring it out for themselves. And I think it's amazing, in light of that, how many of them are doing a good job of it. Since they're piecing together a worldview of a world that is currently tectonically changing under their feet. It's no small thing. It has my admiration. I think that's a big part of why my conversations with boys work so well. Because they know that I am not starting from a place of derision and condescension. Instead, I'm starting in large part from a place of sympathy and even admiration. Because they're having to figure out and enact a whole bunch of social new rules and understandings without any help from anybody, and no generation has ever done that. But anyway, I'm always up for reading about Boys and Sex. And that comes out on the 7th. All of these come out on the 7th. Then we have the next one falls into the somewhat nebulous heading of books about book history. This is by Jordan Alexander Stein, and it's When Novels Were Books. Let me tell you about this. Oh no. Okay, here we go. Literary scholars have explained the rise of the Anglophone novel using a range of tools. And this book reveals that the genre beloved by so many readers today was not born secular, national, middle class, or female. For the first 3 centuries of their history, novels came into readers' hands primarily as printed sheets, ordered into a codex bound along one edge between boards or paper wrappers. A lot of you have actually seen this. firsthand on Jason Harrigan's channel. He has showed you books in all the pre-modern stages that we don't even think about anymore. We think about books like this. Consequently, they shared some formal features of other codices, such as almanacs and Protestant religious books produced by the same printers. Novels are often mistakenly credited for developing a formal feature that was in fact incubated in religious books. So you can see the author is going for a little bit of controversy here. The novel did not emerge all at once. It had to differentiate itself from the goods with which it was in competition. Though it was written for sequential reading, the early novel's main technology for dissemination was the codex, a platform designed for random access. This peculiar circumstance led to the genre's insistence on continuous cover-to-cover reading, even as the media platform it used encouraged readers to dip in and out at will and read discontinuously. So this is catnip. This is exactly the kind of thing I love to read about. Sometimes they convince, sometimes they don't. But I'm always up for reading a history of books. And then the next one, we've been kind of doing a lot of different categories here. And the next one is work in translation. It's a classic in translation. A new translation, new introduction, new notes, entirely brushed up to try and be the definitive book, to be the definitive edition of the book. This is The New Science by Giambattista Vico. It's translated and edited by Jason Tyler and Robert Miner. The New Science is the major work of Italian philosopher Giambattista Vico, first published in 1725 and revised in 1730 and 1744. It calls for a reinterpretation of human civilization by tracing the stages of historical development shared by all societies. Almost unknown during Vico's lifetime, the work had a profound influence on later thinkers from Montesquieu to Marx to Joyce. This edition offers a fresh translation and detailed annotations which enable the reader to track Vico's multiple allusions to other texts. The introduction situates the work firmly within contemporary context and newly establishes Vico as a thinker of modernity. And when this comes out on the 7th of January, it will come out as a $20 paperback. And I would be willing to bet that for most of you, this is a classic of relatively, you know what I mean when I use the word modern. This is a classic of modern conceptual thinking that might not be known to you. You might have encountered Vico's name, but you probably haven't read The New Science. And now, in early January, there's going to be a really spiffy and relatively affordable. $20 is still too much money. That is what this is going to be, right? I should just keep saying that. $25. It's going to be $25, a $25 paperback. For that, you get a huge amount of scholarship, and there are discounts at bookstores, and it'll be at your library. Any library with any sense will have this because it's going. The translators in their introduction say that they are aiming for this to be the definitive edition, and they give what the kids call props to the previous English language edition, which is from 60 years ago, but then they proceed immediately to fillet it, to point out all the things that are wrong with it. And they wouldn't need to do that. It's plenty time for a new translation. Even if there aren't conspicuous errors, the tone that you take, the attitude that you take will all be different. So libraries will almost certainly have this, and if you're interested, you might not find Vico to be tough going. He can be a very engaging read for people, and he was a fantastic observer of his time. I would love it if this were a big collection of his letters, but I haven't read The New Science in English since that previous translation, which was when was it? They actually mentioned. I wonder if I can find it really quickly. They actually mentioned in their 1948. 1948 is when the last translation. That's the translation that I read of this book in English. The previous one. I don't think it's had a translation in English since then. That's amazing for such a major thing. So that's a little bit esoteric. It's a translation, and the book we're going to finish with is also a translation. It's much, much better known. All of you will have heard of it. All of the dude bros among you will have a copy on your shelf right next to Jordan Peterson and The Game. But unlike those books, this one has a blurb by me. And if you're thinking, well, that's kind of odd. I mean, we know you review a lot, and we know you get blurbed on books, but isn't that a paperback release? Aren't these new releases? Well, I'm very happy to say that there are exceptions. Now there are two exceptions. The first exception was the Katz translation of Crime and Punishment, where the publisher came to me ahead of time. I am not like my critical brethren. I am not well known by name at all. So it was amazing to me that they did. They said, can we send you a copy of this? Would you read it? And if you liked it, could we use some of your comments on the hardcover, on the dust jacket of the hardcover? And I said yes. Of course, I didn't think anything would come of it. I didn't think it would ever happen. I have read more. That book was published, I think, by Viking or W.W. Norton, I think. And I've read more of their books than anybody. But I am the Virginia Creeper of the reviewing world. I am the kudzu. I am the moss on the forest floor. I review everything. I read everything. But I have not soared to the Imperium. My name doesn't have the kind of recognition I thought they would ever want to use. But they did. And when that hardcover of Crime and Punishment came out, my name was on the cover. And it's happened again. That same thing has happened again. I wasn't sure until I got the finished copy, but now I am. This is the Michael Nyland translation of The Art of War by Sun Tzu. There you have chainmail on the cover. And on the back, in addition to, I don't know if you can make that out, Dennis Washburn, the translator of Genji, of the Tale of Genji. In addition to him, there is also me. I don't know if you're able to make that out. I'm not really sure. To me, it looks reversed. I don't know if that's going to end up being true. But you see Dennis Washburn there, Steve Donahue there. The one quibble that I have with the blurb on this paperback is going to be in bookstores on January 7th. It's going to be in schools all over the country. It's a slim little thing. It's a really good translation. And my name is going to be on it. There's not going to be any roulette wheel of chance for the paperback. It's going to be there ahead of time. My only quibble is that they list me as managing editor of Open Letters Monthly. When that hasn't been true in years. I am, for those of you who are new to the channel, I am an editor at Open Letters Review, which is the continuation of Open Letters Monthly. Open Letters Monthly was a literary journal that I started with two friends of mine 10 years before that, and we went on at a monthly basis forever and ever, and it was a lot of fun. We published a lot of good stuff. And then that whole enterprise underwent a massive change of editorship and also a rebranding. So it would be nicer if that said Steve Donahue, editor, Open Letters Review, but I'll take it. I'll absolutely take it. So that is the last of our 7 for the 7th, is a book with my name on the cover. Right away, not waiting for the paperback. So, but it's also a translation that I can recommend. And that is it. Should we do a Steve Stack for 7 on the 7th? We have Life in a Cold Climate, new biography of Nancy Mitford. We have Kill, Reply, All, for you to Marie Kondo your electronic life. We have Long Bright River, could easily be a very memorably intelligent thriller. We'll find out together in the new year. Then Boys and Sex. Once again, Sean the Bookmaniac. He'd gone back to cooking his rice, but now he's come back. What? Then When Novels Were Books. About the real origins of the novel. And sounds just fascinating. Then we have The New Science in a new translation with tons of annotations. It's $25, but it's the only version of The New Science that you're going to need for the 21st century. And The Art of War. Many, many, many translations of The Art of War out there. Many, many editions, big and small, but only one with my name on it. So there you go. That is 7 books for the 7th of January. So you'll be warned ahead of time. You'll be ready when you go to your bookstores in the new year. Hopefully with lots of Christmas money and Christmas gift certificates to arm you in case any of these look interesting. But I'm going to wrap this up for now. Sorry it's gone on so long. But I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.